What's going on, everybody? This is an update on the project EOS. Just recently received some news that there's a initiative here led by the ENF to develop a $100 million um, enterprise like ecosystem fund to empower Web3 entrepreneurs. So those of you that have been around for a long time, you know that in the past, with the raise of $4 billion raise for EOS during the ICO, about 4 billion of that was raised, but basically captured by B1. And so since then, the community has um, basically been starved, right, of the funding available to spur any type of commercial based projects or ventures that would leverage the EOS technology stack. And so with this initiative, the network, can or has reached an agreement to launch this $100 million ecosystem fund. I do have some general critique on this initiative, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about how you guys are viewing this news. And I thought I'd give the pros and the cons, so kind of a balanced perspective on the matter because we can't just be doom and gloom, but we also can't be cheerleaders, full cheerleaders either, right? You kind of have to look at things with a balanced lens. So I think the good part about this is one is if this initiative is actually structured appropriately, it's really going to enable it's going to really enable projects to actually build on EOS, which is something that it's been like 5 years, right, since we've really seen any type of this type of energy within the platform. And so I think that is actually a really good thing. Um, where I'm not as educated, and I apologize for this. I mean, maybe it's something I should. Maybe there's someone in the comments that can help educate me um, a little bit further on this matter. But the source of the funds. So this $100 million, is what's the source of that? Are we minting the $100 million out of thin air, or how's this actually being generated in a sense of uh, outstanding tokens? So I think that's a appropriate question for anybody to ask. Uh, but I think that, especially with the latest hackathon and ideathon, you now have a pipeline, right, for projects that maybe are commercially viable to now enter into the realm of getting some funding and launching and having their products used by consumers all around the world. I think what would be helpful here is a couple things. One is, during these proposals that do occur, say between the ENF and the BPs, it would be helpful to have those calls done on a more open manner. My understanding with the latest, initiatives that did occur with this is it was sort of a closed door arrangement with the BPs and ENF, and from an optics perspective, that probably isn't the best, right? You're working towards this trust EVM. You want to provide at least the impression of transparency. One way to do that is just to open up the calls to the community and really embrace and engage in questions that might come up to not only help ensure that the due diligence is done, but also to optimize a process, right, where there could be opportunities to do that. So I think we really still haven't seen that from the likes of the ENF. I still think there's some opaqueness in how these types of matters are coordinated. And I think that does lead to some reluctance in the overall space or from the community of holders or prospective holders, right, to maybe deploy additional capital. Maybe not necessarily remove their capital or, I guess, fiat energy from maybe what they've done in the past, but there is probably reluctance to deploy further capital, right? Because there is still that opaqueness that maybe one might see with a traditional firm. And if that's something that, I personally was interested in, right, in being a part of, then I would invest in a Web 2 firm. I wouldn't be in EOS, right? So there's a competitive landscape here that I think is not being fully realized because it almost I almost get the impression this is being run like a traditional shop. But unlike a traditional shop, see, in a traditional shop, you get something called equity, all right, and you have, you're a stockholder, you're a shareholder. Um, in the EOS landscape, the expectation is to allocate these funds, right, towards towards the network, and I guess you're you're expected to support the moves by the ENF. And so, one has to ask themselves if that's really, um, is it really advantageous from a investment standpoint? I mean, because at the end of the day, that matters. Having, you know, getting a return on your money matters, whether people want to say it or not. And so I think people need to remind themselves, I think folks just need to be aware and cognizant of that, because I think sometimes it gets lost that there are other alternatives. And it's not only important that the process works right with, say, starting up a venture fund, but it's actually markedly better than alternatives that are out there in the traditional space, not only in terms of governance structures, but also in terms of return on investment, right? And so, in a traditional space, albeit with the amounts of interest rates increasing now, and harder for, it's getting more difficult to allocate or find sources of capital. In a traditional space, you can get 5 to 10% return, right, on your investment, on the amount you invest. What's the benchmark for, say, investing in a Web3 venture fund or a Web3 community? I mean, that has to be part of it. It's not just purely altruism, right? That is spurring someone's interest in being a part of a network. And so I think that's where, there still lies some maybe potential identity issues with what it is that a community in this space is looking to accomplish, and more importantly, what, say, a venture fund that is essentially funded by inflation from that community is going to offer the holders. And again, those are some of the questions I have on this. But in particular, the press release here notes that the EOS network, an open source decentralized operating system that can support enterprise scale decentralized applications, is working towards reaching validator consensus agreement to launch the $100 million ecosystem fund. The fund will be managed by the EOS Network Ventures, aka the ENF, which will be established as an independent entity that will invest in Web3 businesses and enterprises building on EOS. So, one of the other questions here is, does community think that ENF being the sole entity allocating these funds is appropriate? Is it more realistic, or is it maybe advantageous to have a quorum, right, or multiple entities that make up the community be part of that group that decides how to invest in these ventures? How is it that you reach consensus on who or what projects to fund? Because that often gets political, right? We are all humans. And last time I checked, the ENF isn't made up of a significant amount of people. I mean, I respect a lot of those people, but um, there there is a there's a risk there, right? Whenever you, I guess, are counting on humans to do the right thing, it's just human nature that sometimes it fails. So I think, having greater controls, or a mixture of, yeah, establishing the consensus or governance layer on allocating funds is a really utmost it's paramount, right, to the success of this initiative. And I would also go as far to say that this is probably um, probably one of the most important chapters for EOS in terms of the fork in the road, in terms of uh, achieving that success, right? That's been away from the reach of the community for such a long time. And so how you engineer and steer this is super critical. And I think that, just having a small number of individuals within the ENF. I mean, again, I don't have anything against those people, but there's some questions there about, you have $100 million of funds. What type of what types of checks and balances are going to be embedded within a decision making process, right? Um, what type of favoritism is there, or politics? Maybe I said things that in the past people in the ENF didn't like. That could apply even today. Some of my recent videos have been brash, and I've been actually labeled as a futter within the EOS network and networks like Telos, who say I just spew FUD all the time. And those that know me know that I've been pretty loyal to the network. I've been around since the very, very early days, even prior to the launch. I think I was around when B1 maybe had like 2 employees, and participated in a lot of those initial calls, okay, with some of those folks. So I've been around for a long time. I've seen a lot. I'm not here to FUD EOS. Um, a lot of my, I'd say I have a pretty decent stake of EOS. Never actually sold my EOS. So, I think anybody who's FUDing should really, yeah, just keep that in mind when watching my videos. This comes from passion. I've actually never accepted also funding from EOS, any Pomelo or any of these grants. And the reason why is because I believe in maintaining sort of a balance, right? An independent voice for the community. One of the few that's left, because if you look at many of the other channels, most of them have some kind of funding strings attached to them. And I think that also that puts people in a compromised position because they're politically then aligned with certain people within the network. But in any event, one thing I do like here that's mentioned on the press release is the EOS Network Ventures will make strategic equity and token based investments into tech startups across the Web3 space. The fund will consist of newly issued EOS tokens, mirroring tokens earmarked for use cases similar to this that the network retired in the past. So these newly issued EOS tokens, that'll be the initial, um, I guess, the fund composition, if you will. And I'm not sure how that translates into a return or equity or position for the holders. And so that's really what I'm still looking for. They do get some vague examples here. The investment proceeds from ecosystem fund will be used to drive value back to EOS token holders through a variety of mechanisms to align economic incentives. For example, through a buyback and burn program. This will serve as a deflationary counterbalance to network spending on grants and public goods. The ecosystem fund will be foundational in both attracting additional external investment and providing ongoing benefit for EOS token holders. So, one of the challenges I think in this whole entire market is how do you create liquidity for small projects, especially for like venture, like new startups that mint their own tokens. There really is no true liquidity for those small projects. And I've always wondered if it would be advantageous for these businesses or ventures to just use EOS as the native token, because it gets around all the all the mess with like I have this token and I'm going to do these swaps and blah, 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 blah. And here's your return if you invest in my token. I think a lot of that is just, it's just very, it's maybe ascertainable for, say, someone who's played in the space for a couple years. But I can't go to my sister or grandma or my mom and say like, hey, um, I have like 1,000 tokens, and you should invest in like 100 of these tokens, right? That's very difficult for a normal person to absorb. Whereas if I go to an average person and say, there's this one token, and by having exposure to this one token, it opens the door to almost like a Microsoft Office of applications and tooling that's much more absorbable for a normal person to understand. It's like, okay, I have this token. It sort of opens the gateway to all these other things. It really keeps it simple. And so I think part of the reason that EOS and a lot of these projects have had a major challenge, right? The liquidity with small projects is the fact that like it's hard to discover these things. But if you retain all your value potentially in a single token, you just build on it, makes it a lot easier. And so I look at spurring like traditional business ventures that use EOS as almost like a native token and uh go back to the model where you're almost charging maybe a small fee to manage your code or your software stack or whatever service you're providing, right? And then deriving a return on value for users, back, but derived within EOS. So it simplifies a lot of the hanky panky swaps with, um, otherwise that would be noted as illiquid tokens. They're not liquid, they have no real value, and there's not a lot of money flowing into them. I think the only way you can counter that is if you have some kind of fiat on ramp and actual demand for your project. And most of the projects that, even with NFTs that we've seen, and I'm not talking about EOS here, I'm just talking overall, most of the projects that were involved in NFTs, what you have to understand is that the NFT, marketplace and valuation and even the volume, that was spurred through easy money and through fraud, right? You had characters and personalities like the FTX Buttercups Fried, likely using, customer funds and putting those into these projects. So it was never based on fundamentals. So if your measuring stick as a leader within EOS, as a leader within ENF, say, is looking at what worked, in the last year and saying, we're going to make NFTs and gaming our main priority, that may not be the right approach because maybe the fundamentals of those models and applications were based on fraud as it is because there was never any underlying, um, need or demand from those. In fact, it could have been artificially engineered, right, through customer funds. So I don't take anything that occurred in the NFT space or any of these things truly as real commercial demand. I think we need to get back to the fundamentals of solving, some of humanity's biggest challenges in deriving equity and, the transfer of value, the transfer of real utility in the physical world as well. And the way you do that is with true engineering and critique. You critique each other's projects and you have a little bit of a duke out like blood sport. And I think it's worth embracing people in your community that do that because they're crazy enough to. If you have a bunch of characters in your space that are always cheerleading and getting happy for some fraudulent DeFi yields, you're never going to build anything because it's all based on sand. So I mean that's where I'll leave it. Some things to keep in mind here as we move forward. Obviously, anybody who's been listening to me for a while knows not to keep your assets on an exchange. It doesn't matter what exchange it is. It doesn't matter how nice the person seems or um, what they promise you or an airdrop, you really should have most of your assets off the exchange, because especially in liquidity events like we're going through, which isn't done by the way, your funds are at risk, right? Your funds are at a tremendous risk, and there's a lot of contagion that can occur. And don't think that FTX is an isolated incident. Remember that FTX, their trading desk got hurt from their own actions on these other products, right, that are out there. And so you'll probably see the ripple effects kind of go through the space, right, over the next couple weeks, months. We're not really sure. With the inflation, with the interest rates basically either pausing or increasing over time, it's going to really bring the water back out to shore, right? And it's going to show everybody who's naked. And this is when you see the real capitulation and failures, market failures that occur within the space. I've been around since 2012. I don't, obviously, I'm not a financial advisor, but I've been around long enough to see a lot of these failures. And it's always the same story, with misallocation of customer funds and basically outright fraud that occurs. And the only way you mitigate against that is holding assets in your possession, okay, either in your brain or through a hardware device or through a couple different combinations thereof. Um, where I hope to see the space going, especially with EOS, is a radically transparent system that enables decision making processes across different organizations, right? And I don't really think we're there yet. I don't think this is really what I personally envisioned. I'd love to hear what you guys envisioned, because that road, that runway for the space, I think is nearing it's sort of out of fork, right? And you have a lot of VCs that, I mean, they deserve to get their ass handed to them, but I think that they may be running out of their own runway to continue to spur capital in the space. So it's an interesting time. I'd say get your popcorn. I don't think this is done, this drama. For those that have your funds and are maintaining your assets, you could sit back. Yeah, it's a little painful because of maybe the fiat, value of some of your holdings. But if you have core holdings, especially in BTC, you know, you can just know that there's a limited amount of BTC that'll ever be created. And, if you're a one coiner, then you're probably in pretty good shape, over a 10 or 15-year basis. Now, how many people have that discipline to hold, in these difficult times? That's what this is testing. And it wouldn't surprise me if many large investment shops are just gobbling these up, right? Because of this event. Because think about it. Before this time period, you really only had like $4 million BTC remaining, and a couple million in circulation. Most of the BTC hadn't actually moved. And so it'll be really interesting to see over time how that ownership allocation evolves. You have trillions of dollars, trillions of worthless fiat chasing ever decreasing volume or amount of BTC in the marketplace. And, with EOS, you have to wonder that investment strategy or the investment justification, what is there to hold over the long haul? What is the benefit to holders? And I think that's where we still have this identity issue, but I think we have some well-meaning initiatives. We'll see if they succeed. I'm always here to, provide the commentary. I'd love to see more comments on my videos. I try to be balanced. I heard some input from community members that I'm a fudder, so I try to give more of a balanced commentary. I'm hopeful on EOS, but I remain a skeptic, and I think it's important to have the skeptics, in your community. The Busan initiative in South Korea is, I think, a good step in the right direction for EOS as a network. You definitely need physical locations there you can deploy technologies, and and test them out in the real world, and the reason why I'm personally like excited about that is because I do think, like, in my hearts of hearts, that a lot of this should tie back to the real world. As much as people want to say, like, these virtual NFTs and JPEGs are worth something, I really think it's about solving the problems. How do you reinvent a hotel network? Um, how do you give people access, right, to a building maybe they have a stake in, or how do you reinvent a power network or a utility network, right? These are all things that our society needs right now because of the unraveling of these traditional systems that are built, themselves on quicksand, right? Web 2, built on quicksand in a sense. We don't know what is real anymore. So we need systems that tell us, right, in real time, the actions and the accountability and the governance structure that makes up our world. And so I would encourage the ENF and the people within the community to do an do an about face in the mirror, and maybe ask yourself, if what you're doing in the network is, do you think that is really fulfilling that vision? Um, I think in terms of an efficiency standpoint, we're not really efficient about our focus and meeting that call. The DeFi stuff doesn't do anything, doesn't solve those problems. The Eden, I would say, unfortunately, has been a major disappointment. It's been highly political, and it's yeah, there doesn't seem to be a balance of focus on technology being developed to enable the community to leverage services. So what are we accomplishing? You're just preserving Eden just to preserve it, Um, those are my rants for today. I really appreciate you guys tuning in to my channel, and hopefully I can stay around in EOS and continue to make these videos. I'll be around the space for sure. I'm not going anywhere, but my work in EOS might be on the ropes, just in terms of like my sentiment and where, like, some of the moves and the governance structure and the transparency and things I believe that should have been done that have not been done, and a pattern of them occurring even with this new group. you know I think it's healthy to for everybody to reevaluate the energy and time they put into things. So I'd love to know what you guys think. Where are you guys at right now? I know it's a tough time for a lot of people, but hopefully you're staying optimistic and positive in your own abilities, regardless of what investments you might have. So, yeah, I appreciate everybody tuning into my channel. Hope you enjoyed. Hope your Thursday is off to a good one, and hopefully we could do another update. Hearing some more progress on some of these key initiatives within the space. So, with that, I'm going to sign off and take it easy, guys. We'll talk to you later. Peace.